Welcome to the Performance Formula with JODY Martins. Brandon, officially welcome to the Performance Formula podcast. It is really, really awesome having you here, and it's very nice to meet you. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Yeah.
Thanks, Jody. Great to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Brandon, maybe just like a quick little background, who you are, what you do, so we can have a sense of what our conversation is going to be about.
Sure. Yeah. The quick version is I have been an athlete my whole life. Played American football at university, and I was very successful. Played on a really great team. Won a couple national championships. Was an All-American here, and while I had a great time, I left the sport with a lot of injuries, including head injuries, and that kind of set me on a path of trying to find, number one, how to heal my body and my brain, and number two, trying to find the edge, I guess you might call it, that I lost after sports, and why that didn't transfer super well into my, entrepreneurial career. And in that vein, I am a coach now. I'm a neuro coach. So I use applied neurology, applied neuroscience to help athletes get out of pain and perform better. And I also coach in what are called flow states. So that ultimate state of peak performance where we feel and perform our best. So I take the worlds of applied neuroscience and the neurobiology of what's going on in the brain in a flow state, and I mesh those together into what I call the NeuroFlow Method. So that's the quick and dirty of my history and how I got to where I am now and what I do. So,
Okay. What do you think would be the sort of best approach in this conversation to teach people what you understand?
that's a great question, Jody.
Because the reason I ask it in that way is I feel like with you, I don't want to texture it with too much of my thinking, right? Which I sometimes do at the start of the podcast. Normally there's sort of things that jump out for me and I go, okay, I'm curious about this. Let me go down this avenue. But I feel like there's so much potentially to cover here. You know, the ideas of pain, flow states I'm fascinated by. But I would imagine that you know best how to navigate that, and so hence my question.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. However, I would counter and say that oftentimes, as we as coaches and educators become so much more specialized and well versed in our areas of expertise, there becomes this gap between where the regular people that really want to use this information are in their knowledge, in their lexicon, and their language of how they talk about it, and where, for example, I might be 20 years in. So somebody like yourself that is still fairly new, not new to the concepts, but maybe further along the path than the regular folk, but not as deep into the rabbit holes as I am, can be a perfect conduit for asking really pointed questions that, I might glaze over. You know what I mean? So you could be really helpful for me in this is what I'm saying. But
as a starting point, let's go with where you're at, right? And what we can learn from you. And then I will happily ask my questions. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. So I also teach applied neuroscience to coaches, trainers, doctors, chiropractors, PTs, everybody that wants to use this fairly new science of the brain and the nervous system and in their own training and with their athletes. So in that way, I do have a little practice of speaking to this to the new kind of layman. But anyway, the best place to start is with pain, I think, because pain is a part of most people's lives and even more so for the athlete. But the paradigm right now is that pain is just something you must accept, that it is there as a test that we need to push through it. In my view, that's simply erroneous and silly. Pain, when you come from a neurological perspective, is nothing more than a signal trying to get your attention that something is off and it needs to change. So if you have pain, chronic pain, which we should identify or at least define as any pain that lasts longer than 3 months. It doesn't have to be debilitating. It doesn't have to be every day. It could be a few times a week where I go for long runs and my knee starts to act up. That's chronic pain, right? So the question then becomes, why are you having chronic pain? Do you have a structural issue? Because more often than not, there is not a structural issue. There is something deeper going on that is the root cause of that pain. So that's a good place to start because most people deal with it. And when we talk about peak performance and flow state, most of achieving flow state and peak performance is managing distractions that take us out of full full in on the task at hand. If you can't be fully present on the game, what you're doing, and you get distracted by anything, the biggest distractor, by the way, is pain, then you can't achieve your peak performance. So that's always a good place to start. And then you can we can kind of talk about how pain works in the brain. And that can be kind of like a microcosm of how the nervous system itself works. And when you understand that and you can kind of tune those dials, then it's a lot easier to find yourself in those states of flow where you can continually perform at your peak.
I'm, and love to go down those two avenues that you sort of mentioned there. But as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about myself, right?
Yeah.
Chronic back pain from throwing lots and lots and lots of cricket balls over my life. Do you make it? And so I'm aware that you talk about structural pain, but I'm also aware that there's maybe something like emotional pain, right? That is something that's
Sure.
not physical. Does that come into your equation here around pain?
Yeah, absolutely. I would consider emotional, well, there's I hesitate to use the word trauma because it just gets thrown around so flippantly these days, but it doesn't take away from what it actually is. And if you have some kind of trauma or some kind of inciting event that is emotional in nature, it really is no different in the brain than a physical event or pain. They get processed in similar areas, and the important thing is that they retain what we might call a memory. In neuro, we call it a neuro tag or a neuro signature, or sometimes you'll hear it called a neural chunk. And it's just like a pattern of brain activation that happens when you have that event. And the example I often use is a young child sitting on a park bench, sunny summer day, eating a ham sandwich, and they hear this bzzz, buzzing, and then they get stung by a bee. Ow! That moment when they get stung creates this neural tag where all of these different brain areas that were active in that moment, they like freeze frame and they create like a thumbprint, like a signature that's different for everybody, right? And it includes all of the information. Where were they sitting? How were they sitting? What was going on next to them? Were they sitting with someone? How was the weather, right? Was it sunny? Was there wind blowing? How does it feel on their skin? They heard the buzzing. They were eating a sandwich, right? All the tastes, sights, sounds, all of the senses, they all get laid down. So the next time that boy may be sitting in the park, and maybe it's a cloudy day, right? And they hear that buzzing. Well, maybe because it's cloudy and they're eating a different sandwich, it doesn't quite trigger the response yet because all the conditions haven't been met, right? There's a certain threshold for everybody. But then another day, he's out there, he's got that ham sandwich again, and it's nice and sunny, and there's a little breeze, and then he hears that buzzing. That might be enough to, trigger the memory of that pain and trigger that, trauma response. When this goes unchecked and it gets out of control and it starts happening and the threshold gets lowered, that's where we start to have like PTSD from an emotional standpoint. But it works the same with pain too, right? Maybe he hears that buzzing and it's enough to trigger the pain. It's like, oh, I feel that pain again.
Mm.
So that's an example of how the neurotag works. But this is the same when it comes to back pain, when it comes to knee pain, when it comes to emotional pain, triggering in a different, maybe in a scenario, like you walk into a coffee shop and you start to hear all the sounds and you remember when your girlfriend broke up with you in a coffee shop just like this, and it triggers that emotional pain. And the crazy thing about these neurotags is they're not time dependent. There is no time, right? It takes you right back to the scenario and your brain processes it like we are in that exact moment again, reliving it the same. So it can be very debilitating, whether it's chronic physical pain or emotional pain, or even like spiritual pain, right? So to me, they all are the same in that they're all pain. I put them all under the umbrella. I even go so far with my clients as to say that I'm going to call your anxiety pain. I'm going to call your unwanted thoughts and behaviors pain. I'm going to call basically every output from your brain that is meant to protect you pain.
Mm.
Some people like that, some people don't, but sometimes it's useful to put it all under just kind of one umbrella. In the neuro world, we talk about it in terms of threat and performance. So if your brain perceives threat from the inputs that it's getting, then it will output some kind of threat response or protective output.
Mm.
Because it's really simple the brain is very simple in its function. Because it really only has, let's say, two jobs. Its first and most important job is to keep you alive. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
It has many ways of doing that. But that's its main function, right? Number two is movement. Most of your brain is geared towards helping you move. So, survival and movement. Number one, for survival, if it's taking an input from all of your senses, exteroception, everything outside of you, and then interoception, everything that's going on inside the body. And then it interprets and decides what to do about that input. In that interpretation, if we perceive threat, then we get protective outputs like pain, anxiety, unwanted thoughts, self-sabotage,
Fears.
fears, absolutely. Yeah. Those are all protective in nature. They're very important. Like pain is a very important thing that human beings experience. If you don't have pain, you will not last very long, right? You'll make mistakes, and one of them will be grave enough to end your time on this plane. So, if we can change our relationship to pain and understand that it's trying to help me out. It's a protective mechanism, like a check engine light or a stop sign that says, hey, let's just take a look, see what's going on under the hood, see what's causing the threat. And if we can remove that threat, no matter where it's coming from, we can get rid of the pain. And that's the coolest thing, is now we can deal with pain with any input. As an example, for your back pain, Jody, we could look at your inner ear and your eyes and see if maybe there's some threat coming from those systems. And I can give you a simple visual drill to get your eyes moving better, because that's such a powerful input to your brain. That can remove a lot of the threat. We remove the threat. The brain goes, oh, I feel better. I know where I am in my environment better now. My eyes move better. I'm going to interpret that as like, I'm a lot less threatened in the world. I can move around better. I know where I'm at. So I don't need to give you that pain anymore. I don't need to protect your lower back anymore. You can move freely. I'll take the foot off the brake pedal and let you go.
Yeah, I think I love the way you explain these things in with a simplicity. Like a lot of these things for me, I understand, and I get it. And hey, maybe some people that are listening to this conversation didn't know these things, right? Um, the sort of the thing I understand about the brain is that the brain is like a pattern detecting machine, right?
Yeah.
And for exactly the same reasons that you say, right? It wants to know how to move in the space, and it wants to know what threats are there outside. And so when it detects a pattern that it's familiar with, it needs to send you a signal, right? It needs to tell you, hey, something is freaking happening here. Be aware of that.
Yeah.
And I've always only equated that with just emotional stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. And so that's what I'm adding from this conversation so far, right? In my understanding is that, hang on, there could also be physical manifestations of that where it is
Yeah.
pain related, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and so that's pretty awesome. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
I think my understanding of pain is that pain is often also a big driver for change, right? You hear somebody like a Mike Gervais in his podcast that I've listened to, he often refers to that, right? Unless there's enough pain, people don't change.
Yeah.
Pain becomes a mechanism through which we can move, right?
Yeah.
Through
What's the
which we,
saying? In order for change to happen, the pain of change must be less than the pain of staying the same.
yes, exactly. I think that
Yeah.
might be the exact quote or something like that that he also tends to use. So, what is your sort of thinking on then? Do we want to be completely pain free? Is that a way to, or how do we make sense of this, right? That our brain does this, and this is sort of the mechanism through which it almost like communicates with our consciousness, I suppose, or our interaction with our body, right? The conscious part of our brain. Do we want to be completely pain free, or is it just about establishing a different relationship with it?
I think it's I think the idea of being completely pain free is a wonderful utopian thought that might never totally exist. um yeah, and it's such a great question because it's kind of, in my work, everybody wants to be pain free. And the state of flow, we get a huge dose of endorphins, which blunts pain. We don't feel pain when we're in flow. And there's a very good reason for that because pain is distraction. And there is, you've heard, I'm sure, of the stories of these incredible feats of strength from the grandmother who lifts the car off of her toddler grandson, in an accident or something. What they don't often tell you in those stories is the aftermath of how that grandmother, while she lifted that car, she tore, 17 muscles and 5 ligaments and maybe stress fractured her legs. And, she was in a massive amount of pain afterward. But during that time, her brain, for survival, said,
Mm.
nope, pain is not ideal right now. It's going to slow us down. We have to save this child. And so we're going to sacrifice our body a little bit in order to make this happen. And there is a specific area of your brain called the periaqueductal gray in your brainstem that is for this reason. That is for, when you're being chased by a grizzly bear and you break your ankle, pain is not useful in that scenario, right? We have to get out of danger. So in order to survive, we're going to risk tearing that ankle to shreds as you run on it down the hill to get you out of this scenario.
Mm.
So pain is always an output from your brain. That's kind of the key here. And we have the ability to modulate that in different scenarios. However, the goal should not be to be pain-free. The goal should be to change the relationship, to understand really what pain is for, the purpose of pain. And like you said, pain does have a purpose. And when we have a good relationship with it, it is a catalyst for change. It's the best catalyst for change, right? And it's very powerful in that way as a signal. Many in the spiritual realm and the personal development realm would say things like your purpose is in your pain, kind of thing. Talking more of emotional, kind of like things that you've been through. You learn big time lessons from your pain. So pain is a very powerful and purposeful signal from our brain that if we can change our relationship to it and just understand why it's there and what it's trying to do to help us, then we can work with it instead of always fighting against it.
Mm. Would you say that pain, so let me give the example rather. Athlete gets a injury, tear their hamstring, ankle goes, whatever it might be, right? And then often, I mean, I've used it myself, is saying, well, maybe that's your body trying to tell you that you need to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a connection with things like that? You know, would there be something where the brain then causes an injury potentially to say, hang on, we burned out in other places. You're overburdening me. Yeah, you know, you're pushing beyond a place that is good for you. And then there could be, again, there could be like that is more an emotional thing. Like you're putting yourself through too much emotional stress about this. So I'm gonna let the hamstring maybe not be supported as it needs to be in the next activity and let it maybe just cause a little bit of something to get you to slow down. I don't know, right? Is there a connection that you're aware of between sort of the brain and injury? Because injury is often then related to pain, that the brain would cause pain in the body almost like
Yeah.
on purpose in order to slow down or in order to create a period of recovery.
So, yes, I love this question. The short answer is no. And here's why. Here's a great example. If you were to go on PubMed or Google Scholar or look up some scientific research around orthopedic injuries, asymptomatic orthopedic injuries, you will find all sorts of studies, imaging studies, looking at lower backs, necks, shoulders, knees, and depending on the age range you're looking at, you can find, I think it's in like the 55 and over, it's something like 60% of people are walking around with bulging discs and disc herniations, disc degeneration, spinal stenosis, all the osises, right? A whole bunch of imaging issues that most orthopedic surgeons would say, oh yeah, we need to operate. But these people are walking around with no pain, no symptoms at all. And the other side is also true, where you have something around 40% of nondescript low back pain sufferers have no structural issues at all. Their MRIs, their CAT scans, everything is totally clean. So, what does that mean? That means that pain does not equal injury, and injury does not equal pain. They're completely separate. Oftentimes, if you have an injury, you will experience pain. Yes, that is true. An acute injury. But we're not talking about acute. After the acute injury phase is over, there's no reason for the brain to give you pain anymore from the structural problem that had arisen earlier. Now the pain is hanging on for another reason. We got to figure out what that reason is. There's threat coming from somewhere else, but the pathway for the pain is now nice and grooved and slick. It's nice and myelinated, as we call it. So it moves fast. It's an energy efficient pathway to get you to pay attention. So that's why we get chronic low back pain, because it's an easy avenue to say, hey, something's wrong here. We got to change it. So number one, we got to think about that. We got to recognize that pain does not equal injury. Injury does not equal pain. Okay, so now that we know that, what about this hamstring thing? Would the brain give you an injury to get you to slow down and to get you to pay attention because something's off, even overworking, right, or something else is going on? I say the answer is no, because not that I know of that brain would actually like cause injury to itself, but it will give you pain. Absolutely. It will say, I need you to slow down. So here's some knee pain. Or remember that hamstring injury you did have that one time? Here's some pain in that hamstring. I'm not going to damage your hamstring, but I'm going to give you some pain.
Okay, can I maybe rephrase my question?
Absolutely.
Or my thought around this as you're explaining, I'm going, okay, maybe I must clarify something. Would the brain, because look, a muscle is linked to tendons and there's a flexibility and a tension within the muscle. And so what I'm hearing sort of, or what I'm making sense of in my own mind here, is that there's a part that says, if the brain doesn't feel there's a threat around something, then it might, and if it's about movement, then it might allow that muscle to move optimally. If the brain detects a threat, it might restrict the movement in an area. And if we then push through that area physically, then we might cause an injury by doing so and not listening to the brain in some way. I don't know if that would be a more accurate sort of thing of where my head was going at with it in the first place, right? That there's, so the brain feels something, so it creates maybe a tension in the muscle, and in the tendons or in the joints, and then we go, oh well, I don't care, I'm just going to forge ahead, and then it basically breaks because we're not honoring essentially that part of our brain that says, hang on, there's something happening here.
That is super common. Yes.
Yeah.
That is very common. It's not the brain that's like setting you up for injury intentionally, right? But it is restricting movement. It's kind of putting the brakes on.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, I don't want you to move more. If you move more, we're going to get injured, and then you do it anyway. And then, then it happens. You get injured. That is super common.
That speaks to, though, and I mean, it comes up in these conversations so much, but I'm curious on what your take is. Like, that speaks to having a high level of self-awareness then, though. Like, about your body, about your mind, about sort of where your brain is at, like way more than just, okay, I feel good today, or I don't feel good.
Jody, you're hitting the nail on the head, and this is like the crux, or maybe the most powerful result of neurotraining, which is what we call applied neurological coaching and stuff, is neurotraining, is the process of actually, I call it opening a dialogue with your nervous system and your brain. And the way that you do that with neurotraining is a very simple assess and reassess process, where in the moment, because the nervous system and the brain act so fast, like instantaneously, right? Because it's an electrical system. It's boom. We can make changes instantly, which is pretty cool for parlor tricks. Like one of my favorite ones is getting people to touch their toes after one neurological input. Boom, they're hitting the floor, and it's like, whoa, what'd you do to me? And it's like, I just made your brain feel safe so that it would let go and allow you to move, right? So it happens instantaneously. And because of that, we can test in the moment. Instead of waiting, like traditional training or PT, waiting for weeks for your body to change, we can test immediately and know if we're on the right track with the inputs that we're giving to your nervous system and your brain. So in that way, I talk about it as opening a dialogue with your nervous system. You're an options facilitator. You're giving it options. Say, do you like this? Your assessment got way better? Okay, good. Let's put that in our bucket of neurotraining drills. We give you a new input. You get tighter. You get more restricted. You get a little pain. Okay, we just raised your threat level. Let's put that one to the side. We'll come back to it. We need to rehabilitate that input a little bit. So in this way, we go through this process, and the more you start to get in tune, you start to feel when you get a good input, and your nervous system just goes, that's nice. I like that. You don't even need to assess. You're like, oh yeah, that was really good. It's like, you ever go outside and it's so bright, you're like, man, holy cow, right? And you put those sunglasses on, you're like, oh, that feels good. That's what I'm talking about. You just in that moment lowered your brain's perception of threat just a little bit, and you felt it through your nervous system's response immediately. Oof, calming, cool. I guarantee if you were to test your toe touch or your shoulder flexion before you put the sunglasses on and then after, you'd probably see an improvement in that range of motion in that moment. That is the process of assessing the state of your nervous system. And when you do that over time, it doesn't take long either. You build up this awareness of your body. It's kind of, we consider it called interoceptive awareness, like what is going on inside my body at any one moment. It's really good to have that awareness, but you also need the accuracy that goes with it. Many people are hyper aware of what's going on in their body. Like every little thing, they can sometimes blow it out of proportion. Like, I feel this little twinge in my wrist. Oh, I can't play today. Like, I'm going to break something. Like or another one. I had a client one time. He was like, my digestion, my gut is so screwed up. Like every day I can only drink, at that point, like he could only drink, like protein shakes, because anything that he would actually eat, it would mess his stomach up. And we dug a little deeper, and it was like, well, what goes on in your gut when this happens? Are you like bloated and you just like curl up in a ball? I can't move. He's like, no, I just hear all this gurgling going on, and I can feel like my gut's moving. And I think I kind of paused, and I'm like, but doesn't that happen to everyone? And he's like, no, it's terrible. It's terrible. And so we actually try it out. I'm like, just eat this thing. And I'm like sitting there, and he's like, yeah, do you hear that gurgling, moving? I'm like, buddy, that's just your digestion working. Like, it's just moving food through you. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's supposed to happen. So he was so aware of everything going on, but the accuracy of what was actually happening and what it means was really, really low.
Yeah.
He didn't know that what he was experiencing was totally normal. So that happens quite often. People can become hyper aware, but very low accuracy of what's going on inside. This neurotraining is really, really helpful for first increasing awareness, because you've probably seen this, Jody, in your time as an athlete and coach and everything. A lot of athletes are very good at dissociating from their body, which is kind of wild when you think about it, because we're using our body so intensely and all the time. But we've been taught to push through pain and to ignore pain. And that's the loudest signal in our body. So when we start to ignore those signals, then we start to ignore other signals also. And so we start to dissociate in other periods and other times, because we start experiencing pain outside of athletics, and we start to ignore it and push it to the side and dissociate from that in our regular life. And then we start to like lose the sense of those little things, like what your gut feels like, what your breathing feels like and whether or not it's regulated and like, where it's supposed to be down here and not up here. When you start to lose that interoceptive awareness, then you're really kind of walking around in the dark when it comes to your own body. And that is a disadvantage, not just for
Mm.
athletes, but for everyone.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be hyper aware either. You got to find a balance of good awareness and accuracy of what's happening, right? And that's where opening that dialogue and just feeding your nervous system new inputs and then testing and testing and testing, you really get to know yourself a lot better.
Mm.
So really
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you definitely add in some layers here, right? In this conversation, because often, so I come from a very much a mental point of view. Normally, right? My training so far in my life has sort of led me to work with people's perception, their beliefs, their meanings, not necessarily always considering 100% say the neurology part, knowing that, yeah, definitely it has an effect. And so certainly what you explained around feeling like that weight's off your shoulders, right? I think that can happen in just a conversation with somebody.
Oh
Sort of in
yeah.
the things that I've been taught and how to sort of work with people from a mental point of view. Often that
Yeah.
is a response. Geez, I feel so much lighter now. Like it feels.
Yeah.
And I suppose what you're explaining is that through work like that, even if it's just conversational, because it sounds like some of the things you do is there's a physical component to it too. You know, which
Definitely.
which which I will admit I have not a lot of understanding about, but I can recognize that that's sort of a difference maybe, or that's certainly an add-on skill that you have, or an add-on ability to speak maybe more directly through the body with the neurology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then, so I was sort of thinking as you were speaking about, because then there's this idea of inside our body, outside of our body, and having that awareness of our body versus not having awareness of ourselves at all. And part of sort of in the background of our conversation at this point in time, we're sort of talking about this idea of flow. Now, I'm aware that for flow, in order for flow to happen, there's a couple of criteria that need to be met. And I think you've spoken quite a lot about sort of the ability to focus and pay attention and really lock into what you're doing. And if there's distractions, then most probably you won't get there. But one of those
Yeah.
criteria is like a loss of self,
Yeah.
not
My
really,
favorite.
not loss of self consciousness, but it's like that loss of sense of the ego sense of self. In other words, like the way I think about it is that self judgment sort of,
Yep.
that self awareness essentially dissipates, and you're so into the task that you're actually becoming part of that task. You no
Yep.
longer exist as a conscious almost entity.
Exactly right.
And so now
Yeah.
I'm wondering how that fits with, say, what you're describing about this, or how do you make sense of being so aware of your body and having all of this, but then when it comes to flow, that could actually be a thing that interferes, or have I got that? Is there something I'm not understanding? Yeah.
No, into like logically that would make sense that it might interfere. But in fact it doesn't, and it actually supports and helps. So yeah, you nailed some of the key characteristics of flow states. One of them, you actually hit on a few of them. One of them is this loss of the sense of self, and that lives in this frontal lobe region in the front of your brain. Um, Also, there is a time dilation that happens. Like the sense of time goes
Warped.
wonky. It slows way, 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 way down. Like if you've ever been in a car accident, like frame by frame, everything you can remember in excruciating detail. But it goes the other way too. Oftentimes, it's more often that it goes way faster. Like a cricket match is over in like what seems like nothing, no time. Like where did the time go? How did that go so fast? So that happens, the sense of self, and then last thing you mentioned was this merging of action and awareness.
Yeah.
This is the feeling of oneness, right? Like you're one with your bat. A musician is one with his instrument. A surfer is one with the board and with the wave. Like it's this, it's called peripersonal space or proprioceptive mapping. We have maps that live in our brains of our body, and it actually extends a little bit outside of our body. That's our bubble, right? That's our like personal space. But when you add a skilled instrument to it, that becomes part of your body. And that's just normal waking life. But when we're in a flow state, that goes even more intensely, and those borders start to expand to the point where sometimes they disappear. At the very, very high end of this is like a mystical experience. That's also a flow state. Same things happening in the brain. It's just a massively enhanced flow state. And that's where you like lose all sense of self and you have like an out of body experience. The same things are happening in a brain, just at a much higher level. So anyway, you mentioned all those things, and they're really powerful and important in a flow state. And they are informed. So that not hyper, but that good awareness that we were talking about with neurotraining, when you build that skill of being very aware and accurate, then you can use that to your advantage to help you get into flow more easily and consistently, because you know where your nervous system is at. And because flow happens in a cycle, the first stage of any flow cycle is the struggle phase, where we're loading information, we're taking in everything that we can, we're building a skill, and we're actually ramping up the nervous system and increasing stress chemicals in order to essentially get ready for the fight. Because basically every flow state that you're going to get into starts with a fight.
Mm.
And you have to choose to fight in order to then drop into flow. And the nice thing is, once you drop in, then you get this big release of nitric oxide, and all those stress chemicals like cortisol, adrenaline, they all flush out of your system, and you reach that effortless effort stage where it's like, I'm totally zoned in and everything feels effortless. Time starts to go away. My sense of self starts to vanish. And I am also completely absorbed and focused. So when that happens, you reach this state of what's called transient hypofrontality. That sense of self that lives in your frontal lobe, as well as your sense of time, which is actually calculated everywhere in your brain. But there's this part called your temporal lobe right here. That shuts down. And then your parietal lobe, where our body maps live, where I end and the world begins, that starts to shut down. So we get this short-lived, which is transient, hypo, opposite of hyper, so less frontal lobe activity. Your frontal lobe actually goes quiet, and all those resources get shifted to the areas of the brain where we have our implicit memory or procedural memory, where we have like our skills. And so then that's when you stop thinking and you just rely on instincts, and every action flows seamlessly to the next. The awareness that we build through neurotraining helps us get through that struggle phase much more easily, because we know where we're at, we know what it's supposed to feel like, and we know where we're getting close. And so then you can continue to push through the struggle, which that's where most people struggle. Poor choice of words. That's where most people quit, is in the struggle phase, because it's like, oh, this is getting frustrating. Maybe I'm hyper aware and I'm like, I don't like these feelings. My stress chemicals are going up. My heartbeat's like beating faster. That must mean danger. I'm going to quit and go do something else. And that's the worst thing you can do, because you're so close to finding that effortless state of peak performance right over the hill if you just keep going. So that awareness and accuracy allows you to push and push and push to get there.
Mm. I think what you say there is beautifully explained, and I agree with it 100%. And now my question to you is that in that struggle phase, right, for people to get over the hill, what is the most important thing that they could be doing, focusing on, be aware of? I don't know if like whatever it is, right? What is that? Is it just because you say keep going with what?
The task that you're trying to complete.
Okay.
And maybe that's a sport or an athletic endeavor, or it's you're training. Maybe that's an article you're writing for your blog. Maybe that's a hard conversation that you're having with a loved one. All of these have a struggle phase at the beginning. And what I do, bringing the applied neurology, neurotraining, and flow states together, is during that struggle phase, I teach my clients specific nervous system inputs or neuro drills to help them ramp up their stress system, upregulate their nervous system so that they're ready for the fight, to push through that struggle. So there are some really simple, I love some breathing drills for this. One's called burst breathing, really rapid, fast breathing to upregulate the nervous system. Some visual drills, because the eyes are brain, right? If you've ever heard Andrew Huberman say that, I love that statement. Your eyes are brain. They're not like extensions of your brain. They're not eyeballs that, like, they are your brain outside of your skull. They're the most powerful system giving our brain information by orders of magnitude more powerful than your body, than your inner ear, your vestibular system. So in this scenario, in the struggle phase, we want to ramp things up and get things going. There's some really easy visual drills, visual movement drills that really ramp your nervous system up. Specifically for your listeners, there's two that I always do with my struggle phase people as we're getting going, is a vertical saccade, which is just a really quick eye movement up and down in the vertical plane, and then a pencil push-up. It's like bringing in a pencil to the bridge of your nose. You follow it in with your eyes so they converge and then go back out. Those two are really good at ramping up the system and like getting you ready to go. And then through the rest of the cycle, there are different neurological inputs that we can give to your brain to lengthen out the flow state so you don't drop out of it, and then to help you recover on the back end.
Yeah. Oh. All of this makes me think, like, I'm in so many of these conversations I'm having, I'm realizing that, like if I take cricketers at an academy, I've coached cricket for a long part of my life. Cricketers come to the nets, they hit balls, they go play a game, they come back, they hit balls, or they bowl, or whatever their skill set is, they go play a game. At some point in time, especially when they're younger, at some point in time, they might start saying, hey, the physical component's important. Normally it's around the age of 13, 14, 15, in that sort of a space where they start recognizing, hey, I've got a bit of potential in this. I've got a bit of ability in this. Let me actually start leveling up here a little bit. Let me get stronger, fitter. All of a sudden you might find in sort of higher up levels that there's fitness requirements, fitness tests, that sort of thing that's coming. So hence it becomes important because something in the environment says, hey, you're going to need you're going to need to be able to do this. And so, yeah, and that's sort of where it stops, really. It doesn't really necessarily go beyond that. Then it just becomes like, well, how do we maximize your skills and your ability? How do we maximize your physical component? Everybody will go, oh, the mental stuff is important, but there's not necessarily any specific thing that gets done about it, if that makes sense. Other than, okay, shucks, I'm going through a bad period, let me reach out. I have a whole bunch of clients that the only time I ever hear from them is when things don't go well.
Yeah.
And so I think part of what you're suggesting, or part of what I'm reading between the lines here in this conversation with you, is that there's work that can be done.
Oh, yeah.
There's 100% work that can be done, things that you can do to level up your brain. And I mean, the way I think of the mental side is not necessarily, it's not the brain. Even though I know the things I do has an effect on the brain, it's not, I don't work with people's brains. I work with their mind. And I make the distinction that mind is sort of your thoughts and your emotions and, your perceptions and your consciousness. But your brain is a physical thing that does work, in
Yeah.
your, it's the physical mass of thing that sits inside your skull. And that is a super complicated, complex thing. And it sounds to me like, and I might have this wrong, right? But the stuff that you do maybe merges a little bit, as I understand the mind and the brain, right? It
Yeah.
might not be your understanding of it, but as I sort of explain it here to you. And so I think that's fascinating, right? That you can actually go do real brain work in order to optimize your brain for performance, which will most probably have an effect on the mind, because then the brain doesn't perceive the threats. So it sends different signals. Then the mind
Exactly.
sort of thinks differently and is aware of
That's
different
it.
things. And so when you
Yep.
do that, ultimately you allow yourself to get into flow more regularly, more consistently, because you can pay attention.
Yep.
It's a phrase I learned from somebody else. I've stolen it. I've made it part of it. It's another guest I had on the podcast. But the ability to focus on the right things at the right time gets enhanced. And if you can do that under pressure, you will perform better, more regularly, more consistently than somebody who can't.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. And um, I also used to separate the mind and we could just say the mind and the body because in that context, the brain is just a part of the body,
Mm.
right?
Yes, yes.
I would challenge you to start to merge those back again because here's my question. Where in your model, where do thoughts come from?
Yeah, you see that I wouldn't really know. They just sit in my head, right?
Yeah.
It's more just an awareness, right? It's
So
just
here's what I want to challenge you on, Jody, is that to start to shift that mindset into the more neurological model, which is that input, interpretation, output, always happening all the time. Think of your thoughts as an output from your brain based on the threat interpretation from the inputs. Just
mm,
like before, just like pain is an output, your thoughts are also
mm,
outputs.
yeah.
Those outputs then become inputs, right? And this is where we can, in a negative way, we can spiral. Our negative thoughts start to increase threat levels, which increase more negative thoughts, and then that starts to spiral. It can go the other way too, right? The important thing though is the what do we do about it? Because it's the same. When you think of thoughts as an output of your nervous system and your brain, then you give it better inputs, you get better thoughts. So
Mm,
that's just in general how I approach mindset training.
mm,
I still think of it as a mind, and you gotta be able to recognize your thoughts, be aware of them, and you can change them and you can reframe and you can do all the what we might consider mindset tools that are language based,
mm.
very frontal lobe based. But a lot of times our frontal lobe's not making the decisions when we're in threat. That's our survival brain. And our survival brain back here doesn't have language.
It doesn't have
It does
language,
not
yeah.
speak words at all. It
Mm,
speaks body input. So sometimes in your mindset training, it's kind of important to recognize that and treat your brain like a baby because your survival brain is a baby. And
mm,
so you have to give it soothing inputs to make it feel safe, and then you can think better, have better thoughts. The other side of that, here's a really important, this is the last piece of this.
no, all good.
There's a really important part of your brain called the cerebellum. It lives in the back, bottom part of your brain. It's 10% of your brain's size, but it has 50% of the neurons. It's incredibly dense. It's very important for accuracy, balance, and coordination of movement. So you want to be a better cricket player, you train your cerebellum. You want to be a better musician, train your cerebellum. You want to be a better singer or freestyle rapper, you got to train your cerebellum because those movements are coordinated by it. How it does that, this is the important part, is it is an inhibition machine. It makes smooth, balanced, coordinated movement by inhibiting unwanted movement. So that's when you see somebody that has a tremor, that's their cerebellum not working right. It's not inhibiting the unwanted movement to make it smooth.
Mm.
So the crazy thing is this also works with emotions and thoughts. Your cerebellum inhibits unwanted emotions and thoughts. If we want to think better, have a better mindset, and inhibit like reactionary emotions to help us with emotional intelligence and, all that good stuff, we can train our cerebellum to help us with that. There are simple neuro drills that you can do to train that part of your brain. And when you do that, your threat level lowers, which is great, makes you think better, clearer, more positive. But it also helps to inhibit the unwanted ones that pop up out of nowhere, right? We've all had that, which is these random thoughts that are like, you're like, what is that? I don't think like that. Like, that's not me, but they're there. It happens because your brain is a pattern recognition machine. And whatever you feed it, it will start to see patterns and see those things. That's why I always tell my clients, like, garbage in, garbage out. Like, you got to be careful what you watch on TV or on your phone, right? Because if you're feeding your mind garbage all the time, and I'm usually referring to like these crime-based television shows that are all about like serial killers and Law and Order SVU. If that's all you watch and that's all you're feeding the pattern recognition machine, no wonder you're going to see all sorts of bad stuff in the world. You've trained your mind to see that. So that's kind of a tangent, but the important thing is that we can train the brain and through the nervous system how to get better at inhibiting unwanted thoughts and freeing up your mind to make better predictions and better thoughts and and to think more positively. And one of the best ways, as you know already, to do that as a practice from a top-down approach is gratitude. Practicing gratitude changes your brain to see more positivity and appreciation in the world. That's a top-down approach. In neurotraining, we use more of the bottom-up approach to train the cerebellum to inhibit those unwanted things and to, become more aware of the good things as well.
Yeah. I appreciate that for you pushing my boundaries a little bit. And it's not so much a boundary push, right? It is an area in which as you were sort of explaining that, it's an area where I would often sort of question, I'd have some questions around that. Not only that I'm aware of what those questions are, but it would be things that don't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And I feel like the simplicity of that sort of input, interpretation, output idea, and specifically when people come and they say, because I've had so many athletes who say, can you just stop me from thinking negatively, please? Like, and that sort of gives the sense of why that spiral is happening. It's because you're putting you're putting a negative input, you're interpreting this most probably as the worst thing that can happen. And then it just puts out more bad things, and then that becomes the input, and then it just the next one, right?
Yep.
And so that means you have to be able to effectively interrupt.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I think your strategies might then be, like you say, bottom up strategies to interrupt, but you could also have some top down where it's okay, every day I do my gratitude practice. And then that makes complete sense, right? That then makes complete sense as to why something like a gratitude practice is so powerful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because it's literally changing the way that your brain is wired.
Yeah.
Through neuroplasticity. And that's really what we're harnessing with all of our training, whether it's top down with mindset and like talk therapy or whatever else, or it's bottom up. Everything is trying to leverage neuroplasticity in your brain so you have better, more well-worn pathways that are going to lead you in a positive direction.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brandon, I've loved this conversation. I feel we must do this again.
Yeah.
I feel like
too.
there's more.
This was great.
I feel there's more I can pick your brain on, and let's see how it goes. But I'd love to do this again. If people have listened to this and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram primarily. My handle is I am Brandon Day. Um, and then I also have a free community on School called the NeuroFlow Performance Lab, um, where I host a ton of free resources on neuro training, on flow state trainings, and you could walk through there and get yourself out of pain and find more flow totally for free. You can spend hours and hours in there learning all sorts of cool stuff. And I show up and coach every week for a full hour totally for free on that in that
Awesome.
community. So yeah, that's a growing and awesome community. That and Instagram are probably my two where I spend most of my time. So you can find me at either of those.
Awesome. I'll make sure there's links to that in the show notes below.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. This was great. I really enjoyed it. I'd love to come back sometime.
Perfect.
All right.
Cheers. Bye.